The alarms had been silent for 3 days now. Yuna stood in front of the empty incubation chamber and felt her heart sink deeper with each passing hour. 7 dragon hatchlings from the Ember Clutch were gone, not dead, not stolen by any intruder they could find. Just gone, as if they had never existed at all. The Valorian Dragon Sanctuary was the largest of its kind in the known galaxy. It floated in orbit around a massive gas giant called Theros 7, where the radiation from the planet below provided natural warmth for the hundreds of dragon species kept inside. For 2,000 years, the sanctuary had protected these magnificent creatures. Never once had they lost a single hatchling. Until now. Yuna pressed her scaled hand against the glass of the chamber. She was Valorian, like most of the staff here. Her people were tall and thin, with pale blue skin that stayed cool even in extreme heat. They had built this sanctuary because they believed dragons were sacred. The Ember Clutch was the rarest of all breeds. Their scales glowed like living fire, and their bodies burned at temperatures that could melt steel. Only 12 existed in the entire universe, and 7 of them had just vanished from the most secure facility ever constructed. Overseer Yuna. A voice came from behind her. She turned to see Jiho walking toward her. Jiho was young for a security analyst, barely 200 years old by Valorian standards. But she was sharp and dedicated, which was why Yuna had kept her on the investigation team. "Any news?" Yuna asked. Jiho shook her head. "Nothing. We have checked every camera, every sensor, every door log. There's no sign of forced entry. No sign of any entry at all." Yuna closed her eyes. The High Council was already sending investigators. Counselor Dravex, who had never liked the sanctuary's independence, was using this disaster to push for a complete shutdown. If they did not find the hatchlings soon, everything they had built would be destroyed. "How does something like this happen?" Yuna whispered. "They are babies. They cannot fly. They cannot walk more than a few steps without falling over. How did they escape a chamber designed to contain adult dragons?" Jiho had no answer. Nobody did. Far below the main levels of the station, in a part of the sanctuary that most species never visited, a human named Taiho was finishing his work for the day. He was a maintenance technician, one of only 3 humans employed on the entire station. His job was simple. He fixed things that broke: pipes, wires, air filters, heating systems. Nothing glamorous, nothing important. Just the quiet work that kept the station running. Taiho was not tall by human standards. He had a round face and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He had come to the station 6 months ago after spending years working on cargo ships that traveled the outer edges of known space. He liked it here. It was peaceful. The dragons were beautiful, even from a distance, and nobody bothered him in the lower decks. He finished sealing a crack in an air processor and wiped his hands on his jumpsuit. His shift was over. Time to go back to his small quarters, eat something warm, and sleep. But as he walked down the dim corridor toward his room, he heard something strange. A small sound, like a crying baby, but higher and more musical. It was coming from inside the walls. Taiho stopped and listened. The sound came again, then again. Multiple voices now, all crying in that strange, beautiful way. He looked up at the ventilation grate above his head. Something was moving inside. Most people would have called security. Most people would have run away. But Taiho had always been curious, and he had never been very good at following rules. He reached up, pulled the grate open, and looked inside. 7 pairs of glowing eyes stared back at him. Taiho did not scream. He did not panic. He simply stood there, looking at the tiny creatures huddled together in the metal shaft. They were no bigger than kittens, with scales that shimmered between orange and gold. Their wings were small and useless, pressed flat against their backs. And they were shaking with cold, even though the air in the shaft was warm by any normal standard. "Hello there," Taiho said softly. The largest of the creatures made a small chirping sound. It crawled forward on unsteady legs and sniffed at Taiho's hand. Its nose was warm against his skin. Then, without warning, it climbed onto his palm. Taiho felt the heat of the tiny body against his fingers. It was not uncomfortable. It was actually pleasant, like holding a cup of hot tea on a cold morning. The creature made a happy sound and pressed itself closer to his wrist. The other 6 watched with wide, curious eyes. "Are you lost?" Taiho asked. He knew they could not understand him, but talking helped him think. "You must be cold. The ventilation system is not designed for anything living." One by one, the other hatchlings crawled toward him. They climbed up his arm, onto his shoulder, down into his collar. They were seeking his warmth, he realized. His body temperature was higher than anything else on this station. To these little creatures, he must have felt like a son. Taiho looked around the empty corridor. He knew he should report this. He knew these creatures probably belonged somewhere important, but they were so small, so scared, and it was late, and he was tired, and surely a few hours would not make any difference. "Okay," he said quietly. "You can stay with me tonight, but just for tonight." He carried them back to his quarters, 7 tiny dragons pressed against his chest, and for the first time in their short lives, the hatchlings stopped crying. 2 weeks passed, and the sanctuary grew more desperate with each day. Search teams had checked every room, every corridor, every storage closet on the station. They had scanned for heat signatures, tracked air movements, and interviewed every single member of the staff. Nothing. The 7 ember hatchlings had simply vanished. Counselor Dravex arrived on the 12th day. He was old even by Valorian standards, with scales that had faded to a dull gray and eyes that held no warmth at all. He had spent his entire career looking for reasons to reduce funding to the sanctuary. Now he had found the perfect excuse. "This is unacceptable," he said, standing in the center of the command room, while Yuna and her staff watched in silence. 7 of the rarest creatures in existence, lost under your care. The Council is prepared to shut down this entire operation. Yuna kept her voice calm, though her hands were shaking beneath her robes. "We are still searching, Counselor. The hatchlings could not have left the station. They must be somewhere inside." "Then why have you not found them?" Dravex stepped closer, towering over her with cold authority. "Perhaps they were stolen. Perhaps there is a traitor among your staff. Have you considered that possibility?" "We have investigated everyone. There is no evidence of theft or betrayal." "Then investigate harder." Dravex turned and walked toward the door. "You have 1 more week. If the hatchlings are not found by then, I will personally oversee the closure of this facility." After he left, Yuna sank into a chair and covered her face with her hands. Everything she had worked for, everything her family had protected for generations, was about to disappear. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. Jiho stood quietly in the corner, watching her superior with worried eyes. She had not slept properly in days. Every hour that passed felt like a weight on her chest, but she was not ready to give up yet. There had to be something they had missed, some clue they had overlooked. She returned to her workstation and began reviewing the personnel files again. If the hatchlings had been stolen, there had to be a motive. Who would benefit from taking them? Who had access to the incubation chambers? Who had been acting strangely in the past few weeks? She scrolled through name after name, face after face. Most of them she knew personally. Scientists who had devoted their lives to dragon conservation. Security officers who took their jobs seriously. Maintenance workers who kept the station running. Maintenance workers. Jiho stopped scrolling. She pulled up the file for the lower deck crews. There were 23 maintenance technicians on the station, most of them Valorian. But 3 of them were not. 3 of them were human. Jiho had never paid much attention to humans before. They were rare in Valorian space, mostly found on cargo ships or mining stations. They were considered unremarkable by most species, too soft, too fragile, too emotional. They lived short lives and felt everything too deeply. Most Valorians avoided them because something about their presence felt strange, unsettling. Humans were always so warm. Warm. Jiho sat up straight in her chair. Her mind was racing now, pieces of a puzzle coming together in ways she had not expected. She pulled up the biological data for ember dragons and compared it to the station's environmental records. Ember dragons needed extreme heat to survive. Their internal temperature ran higher than any other known species. The incubation chambers maintained a precise temperature of 200 degrees, carefully calibrated to Valorian standards. But what if that was not enough? What if the hatchlings needed something more than just heat? She searched for the thermal readings of every species on the station. Valorians ran cold, barely above room temperature. Most of the other species were similar, but humans were different. Humans ran at nearly 100 degrees internally, 15 degrees warmer than any other crew member on the station. To a newly hatched ember dragon, desperate for warmth, a human would feel like a bonfire in the middle of winter. Jiho ran to find Yuna. She found her still sitting in the command room, staring at nothing. "I think I know where they are," Jiho said breathlessly. Yuna looked up, hope and fear fighting for control of her expression. "Where?" "With one of the humans, the maintenance technicians who work on the lower decks. Their body temperature is higher than anything else on this station. If the hatchlings escaped looking for warmth, they would have gone straight to the nearest heat source." For a moment, Yuna said nothing. Then she stood, her eyes sharp and focused again. "Show me the personnel files, all 3 of them." Jiho pulled up the records on her datapad. 2 of the humans worked on the upper maintenance levels, near the cargo bays. But one of them worked alone in the deep lower decks, close to the atmospheric processors. His name was Taiho. He had been on the station for 6 months. He had no disciplinary record, no suspicious activity, no contact with the incubation chambers at all. But his quarters were directly below the ventilation system that connected to the hatchling wing. "Get a security team," Yuna said quietly. "We need to search his room. Now." Jiho hesitated. What if he did not steal them? What if they just found him on their own? Yuna's expression softened for just a moment. "Then we will know soon enough. But we need to be prepared for anything." They gathered the guards and headed for the lower decks. None of them knew what they would find when they arrived. None of them could have imagined the truth that was waiting for them behind that simple door. The lower decks were quiet at this hour. Most of the maintenance staff had finished their shifts and returned to their quarters. The corridors were empty except for the soft hum of machinery and the distant sound of air moving through ventilation shafts. Yuna walked at the front of the group, her heart pounding in her chest. Behind her, Jiho kept her eyes on the datapad, tracking their location as they moved deeper into the station. 4 armed guards followed in silence, their weapons ready. They reached the door to Taiho's quarters. It was a small room, barely larger than a storage closet. The kind of space reserved for workers who had no status, no family, no reason to need anything more. Yuna felt a strange twist of guilt in her stomach. She had never once thought about the people who lived down here, keeping her sanctuary running while she focused on the dragons above. She raised her hand and knocked. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time. "Open the door," she ordered one of the guards. The guard stepped forward and entered the override code. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the dark room inside. What Yuna saw made her freeze in place. The human was lying in his bunk, still wearing his work clothes. His eyes were closed, his breathing slow and steady. He was clearly exhausted, the kind of deep tiredness that comes from many sleepless nights. But that was not what made Yuna stop. On his chest, arranged in a perfect circle around his heart, 7 dragon hatchlings lay sleeping. Their scales glowed softly in the dim light, pulsing with a gentle rhythm that matched the human's heartbeat. The smallest one had tucked its head beneath his chin, its tiny claws gripping the fabric of his collar. Another had curled around his neck like a living scarf. The rest were spread across his chest and stomach, their wings folded, their eyes closed, their bodies rising and falling with each of his breaths. They looked healthy, more than healthy. They looked content in a way that Yuna had never seen in a dragon before. "Lower your weapons," she whispered to the guards. "Slowly, do not make any sudden movements." The human stirred. His eyes opened, and for a moment he looked confused. Then he saw the armed figures standing in his doorway, and his expression changed to fear. But instead of jumping up or trying to run, he simply raised his hands very carefully, keeping his body as still as possible. "Please," he said softly, "please do not scare them. It took 3 days to get the little one to stop crying." Yuna felt something shift inside her chest. This was not the voice of a thief or a criminal. This was the voice of someone who cared, someone who had been protecting these creatures, not stealing them. She stepped into the room alone, leaving the guards at the door. The human watched her approach with wide, nervous eyes. But he did not move. He stayed perfectly still, letting the hatchlings sleep undisturbed on his chest. "How long have they been with you?" Yuna asked. 2 weeks, the human replied. "Maybe a little longer. I found them in the ventilation system the first night. They were crying and shaking. I thought they were cold. I was going to report it the next morning, but they fell asleep on me, and I did not want to wake them. And then the next day they seemed so happy, and I thought maybe one more day would not hurt. And then—" He trailed off, looking down at the sleeping creatures, with an expression that Yuna could only describe as love. "You should have reported this immediately," she said, but there was no anger in her voice. "I know. I am sorry. They needed me. I could feel it. Every time I tried to put them down, they would start crying again. But when I held them, they were calm. They were safe." He paused, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Nobody has ever needed me like that before." Yuna looked at the hatchlings more closely. Their distress indicators, which had been constantly elevated since their birth, had completely normalized. The faint trembling that had worried the medical staff for months was gone. Their scales were brighter and more vibrant than she had ever seen. These creatures were not just surviving, they were thriving. "What is your name?" she asked. "Taiho. Taiho, I am Yuna. I am the overseer of this sanctuary." She crouched down beside his bunk so they were at eye level. "You are not in trouble, but I need you to understand something. These hatchlings are incredibly rare and incredibly valuable. The entire galaxy has been searching for them. People thought they were dead. People thought they were stolen." "I never meant to cause any problems," Taiho said quickly. "I will give them back. I wanted to make sure they were okay first." Yuna looked at the smallest hatchling, still pressed against the human's throat. It made a soft chirping sound in its sleep, and its tiny tail curled tighter around his collar. "I do not think they want to leave you," she said quietly. Jiho appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with amazement. "Overseer, their vital signs are perfect, better than perfect. Whatever this human is doing, it is working better than anything we ever tried." Yuna stood up slowly, her mind racing with possibilities. The council wanted answers. They wanted the hatchlings returned safely. But what if returning them to the incubation chambers was the wrong choice? What if the thing they needed most was something that no machine could ever provide? "Taiho," she said carefully, "how would you feel about keeping them a little longer?" The medical bay was crowded with scientists. all of them staring at their instruments with expressions of complete disbelief. Taiho sat in the center of the room on an examination table, still covered in sleeping hatchlings who refused to let go of him. Dr. Sunwoo, the sanctuary's chief medical officer, walked in slow circles around him, taking readings and shaking his head in amazement. He was an older Valorian with gentle hands and curious eyes, the kind of doctor who cared more about understanding than treating. "This is impossible," he muttered for the 5th time. "These readings should not exist." "What do you mean?" Yuna asked. She stood near the door with Jiho, watching the examination with growing concern. Sunwoo pulled up a holographic display showing the hatchlings' vital signs. Ember dragons require specific conditions to develop properly. Heat is the most important factor, but it is not just about temperature. They need organic fluctuation, the natural rise and fall of warmth that happens inside an egg. Our incubation chambers maintain a constant temperature because we believe that was safest. But look at this. He pointed to a graph showing the temperature patterns around Taiho's body. The line moved up and down in a steady rhythm, matching his heartbeat and breathing. Human body temperature is not constant. It changes slightly with every breath, every movement, every emotion. And humans produce something else that no machine can create. Sunwoo tapped another display, showing a complex pattern of chemical signatures. These are hormones, specifically the hormones that humans release when they feel affection or protection toward something. The hatchlings are absorbing these chemicals through their skin. Yuna stepped closer, studying the data. "Are you saying they are bonding with him, like a mother to a child?" "More than that. They are imprinting on him, his heartbeat, his warmth, his emotional state. To these hatchlings, this human is home. He is safety. He is everything they needed and everything our machines could never provide." Taiho looked down at the tiny creatures on his chest. The smallest one had woken up and was staring at him with bright, trusting eyes. It made a soft chirping sound, and he smiled without thinking. "I did not do anything special," he said quietly. "I just held them." "That is exactly what they needed," Sunwoo replied. "Someone to hold them, someone warm, someone who cared." He turned to Yuna with a serious expression. "If we remove them now, if we put them back in the incubation chambers, I cannot predict what will happen. The psychological damage could be severe. They might stop eating. They might stop responding to treatment. They might simply give up." Before Yuna could respond, the door to the medical bay burst open. Counselor Dravex strode in with 2 guards at his side, his expression twisted with fury. "I heard the hatchlings were found," he said coldly. "And I heard they were found in the possession of a human worker who had been hiding them for weeks." Yuna moved to stand between Dravex and Taiho. "The situation is more complicated than that, Counselor. The hatchlings were not stolen. They escaped on their own and found this man because they needed his warmth." "His warmth?" Dravex laughed, a harsh and ugly sound. "This is absurd. This human is clearly a thief, and he should be prosecuted to the full extent of galactic law. Guards, take him into custody." The guards moved forward, but Yuna raised her hand. "Stop. I am still the overseer of this sanctuary, and I am telling you that this man has committed no crime. He hid stolen property for 2 weeks. He provided care for creatures that were dying under our watch." Yuna's voice was steady, but her eyes burned with quiet anger. "Our machines failed them. Our technology failed them. This human succeeded where we could not. If anyone should be blamed for this situation, it is us." Dravex's face darkened. "You would protect a human over the reputation of this institution?" "I would protect these hatchlings over anything. That is my duty. That is why this sanctuary exists." She turned to Dr. Sunwoo. "Show him the data. Show him what happens when these creatures are separated from their guardian." Sunwoo pulled up a simulation on the holographic display. It showed the predicted outcomes if the hatchlings were removed from Taeho's care. The numbers were grim. Elevated stress hormones, declining vital signs, increased risk of failure to thrive. The smallest hatchling had only a 30% chance of survival. Dravex stared at the data in silence. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, Yuna thought he would simply ignore it and order the arrest anyway, but even he could not deny the evidence in front of him. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "The human can keep them for now. But I want a full report on this situation within 3 days, and if anything goes wrong, if any of those creatures are harmed in any way, I will hold you personally responsible." He turned and walked out without another word. The room was silent for a long moment. Jiho let out a breath she had been holding. That was close. Yuna nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "This is not over. The Council will want answers. They will want to understand how this happened and whether it can be repeated." "Can it?" Taeho asked. He was still sitting on the examination table, still holding the hatchlings against his chest. "Are there other creatures who need this kind of care? Because if there are, maybe other humans could help." Yuna looked at him for a long moment. This quiet, ordinary man who had accidentally changed everything they knew about dragon care. He was not special by any galactic standard. He was not powerful or important or wealthy. He was just warm. And he was kind. And he had held these creatures when they needed to be held. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "perhaps there is something we can build from this." 6 months had passed since the night Taeho found 7 frightened hatchlings crying in a ventilation shaft. In that time, everything had changed. The Valorian Dragon Sanctuary had become the most talked-about facility in the galaxy. Scientists from 100 different worlds had traveled to study the bond between the human guardian and his dragon charges. News networks broadcast stories about the quiet maintenance worker who had accidentally revolutionized interspecies care. And the sanctuary, once threatened with closure, had received more funding and support than ever before in its history. Taeho walked through the new garden wing, a massive enclosed space filled with plants from Earth and heat lamps designed to mimic sunlight. The 7 ember hatchlings followed behind him like a parade of glowing shadows, their scales shimmering with healthy fire. They had grown so much in the past months. The smallest one, whom Taeho had named Buell after a star visible from his childhood home, was now nearly the size of a large dog. She still preferred to ride on his shoulder, her tail wrapped around his arm for balance. The others had names, too. Hana, Duri, Somi, Jinu, Yeri, and Maru. He had named them during those first quiet weeks, when it was just him and them in his tiny maintenance quarters. Back then, he never imagined that anyone would care about a human naming dragons. Now those names were in scientific papers and news reports across the galaxy. "They look happy," a voice said from behind him. Taeho turned to see Yuna approaching. She had changed too in the past months. The weight of worry had lifted from her shoulders, and she smiled more easily now. Her role had expanded beyond overseeing the sanctuary. She was now leading the Human Integration Program, a new initiative that was bringing humans to dragon care facilities across the Valorian territories. "They are happy," Taeho replied. Maru was chasing a butterfly through the garden, stumbling over his own wings as he tried to catch it. "They love this place, so much room to run around." "And you? Are you happy?" Taeho considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, he had been a nobody. A maintenance worker living in a closet-sized room, fixing pipes and wires while the rest of the station forgot he existed. He had come to this place because he had nowhere else to go. No family waiting for him. No home calling him back. Just the quiet loneliness of space and the simple comfort of useful work. Now he had a title. Clutch Guardian, they called him. He had proper quarters with windows that looked out at the stars. He had a salary that was 3 times what he used to earn. And most importantly, he had 7 small creatures who loved him more than anything in the universe. "Yes," he said softly. "I think I am." Yuna smiled and walked beside him as they watched the hatchlings play. Jiho joined them a moment later, carrying a datapad filled with the latest reports. 12 new humans have been approved for training, she said. They will arrive next week. We are also receiving requests from other sanctuaries. The crystalline preserve on Vorax Prime wants to know if humans can bond with ice dragons. They run cold instead of hot, but they have similar emotional needs. Humans are adaptable, Yuna replied. I think we will be surprised by what they can do. A message appeared on Jiho's datapad. She read it quickly, and her eyes widened. The Galactic Science Council just published their findings. They say that human empathy produces measurable effects on the creatures in their care. Not just dragons. Multiple species have shown improved outcomes when raised by human guardians. Taiho listened to this with quiet amazement. All his life, humans had been treated as lesser beings in galactic society. Too fragile to be soldiers, too emotional to be diplomats, too short-lived to be scholars. They were tolerated, sometimes employed, but never respected. The galaxy had looked at humanity and seen nothing worth valuing, but maybe they had been looking at the wrong things. Overseer Yuna. A young scientist ran up to them, breathless and excited. The council sent a message. They want to establish a training center for human caregivers, a permanent facility dedicated to teaching humans how to bond with endangered species across the galaxy, and they want you to lead it. Yuna's expression shifted from surprise to something deeper. Pride, maybe, or hope. She had spent her entire life protecting dragons because she believed they were sacred. Now she was being asked to protect something else, something that might be even more important. The future. She looked at Taiho, who was kneeling in the grass while Buell climbed onto his back and chirped happily in his ear. He was laughing, a warm and genuine sound that seemed to make the air around him brighter. "Tell the council I accept," Yuna said. Later that evening, Taiho sat on a bench in the garden with all 7 dragons piled around him. Bayul was in her usual spot on his shoulder. Hana had curled up in his lap. The others were scattered across the bench and the ground beside him, sleeping peacefully in the fading light. He thought about his old life, the lonely ships, the empty rooms, the years of feeling invisible and unimportant. He had never imagined that things could be different. He had never believed that someone like him could matter to anyone. But then 7 frightened babies had crawled out of a ventilation shaft and chosen him. Not because he was strong or special or powerful, just because he was warm, just because he cared. Above him, the stars burned bright and endless. Somewhere out there, other humans were being trained to do what he had done. Other creatures were waiting to be held, to be loved, to be saved by the simple gift of human warmth. Taiho closed his eyes and held his dragons close. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. And the dragons slept on, safe and warm, dreaming of fire and stars and the steady heartbeat of the human who had become their home.